Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Given here, back to the video. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the midnight changes coming to Balanced Druid. If you want to follow along with the guide, there is a link in the description of the video. It'll take you out to this exact same article and you can kind of follow along. That being said, let's go ahead and jump into it. So the first big change that is coming to Balanced Druid, and this is like a major change, is how our eclipses work. So the way the eclipses used to work is you'd cast Wrath or Starfire, and that would put you in either solar or lunar eclipses, and you kind of go back and forth between different eclipses. And at the end of, I believe, the War Within, you were just casting Wrath to go into a solar eclipse, and we weren't even messing with Starfire at all, in Mythic Plus at least. But yeah, so that's all changing now. So the way that Eclipse works now is its own button. So there's no more casting Wrath or Starfire to go into a specific eclipse. So it's going to last for 15 seconds, and it's on a 30-second cooldown. And if you press Wrath, that's going to put you into a solar eclipse. If you press Starfire, that's going to put you into your lunar eclipse. And kind of the design goal behind this, kind of what this text talks about here, is you get to choose when your burst window happens, and it takes some of the setup time out of it as well. You know, casting 2 Starfires, for example, takes a long time to set up your burst. Then you'd have to apply your dots as well. Then you'd have to build Astral Power and dump that into Starfalls. Just the setup time took too long. So the idea behind this is to kind of reduce some of that setup time. So this is probably the biggest major change with Balanced Druid right here, is just how our Eclipse system works. And with this current system, so there's a talent called Improved Eclipse that we'll talk about here in a minute. Actually, I guess we could just talk about it right now. So we'll go down to Improved Eclipse. Here it is. So this will give us +1 charge to solar and lunar eclipse. So essentially what this means is you get 1 charge that will last for 15 seconds on a 30-second cooldown. Then you'll get another one. So you can kind of use this back to back. And with like trash and everything and like walking between packs, you could probably assume that you're going to get about a 60 to 80% uptime on your eclipse throughout the entirety of the dungeon, right? Just because you add an extra charge does not mean that you're getting 100% uptime on this. The cooldown is still 30 seconds. You're just getting an extra charge, right? So if you factor in like walking in between trash packs and all that, you know, that's kind of where we get that 60 to 80% number. Okay, moving down into this next section here, this is pretty much all stuff that we talked about already. But we also have our mastery getting reworked. So our old mastery is Mastery Astral Invocation. So your nature spells do 4% increased damage and 2%, or an additional 2% to targets affected by Sunfire, and then the same thing for Moonfire here. So this means that you basically always had to have your dots up. If they fell off even for a second, your damage would tank. So this is a look at our new mastery. So your nature spells will do 6% increased damage, and our arcane spells will do 6% increased damage. So our dots falling off are not going to impact us nearly as much as they had done in the past. So we also had Waning Twilight that was removed. This is another thing that would kind of make us dot lock. And it kind of funneled into our old mastery. So when you have 3 periodic effects from your spells onto your target, they take increased damage. So that is gone completely. And again, this all kind of goes into the ramp time. It's been a problem with Balanced Druid for a very long time. And I'm not saying that the ramp still isn't there, but they are making steps to improve it here. We did also get a decent buff to our dots and our passives. So our Moonfire, Sunfire, and Shooting Stars all deal 50% increased damage now. And the Starfire secondary, so we did get a 50% increased damage to Starfire, which is nice. And the reason that we got this is because we had a lot of talents in our tree that focused on doing additional damage to secondary targets. All those talents have been removed, so that's why we got the damage bonus to Starfire just baseline. So that was a pretty big change. And we also had some changes to Heart of the Wild. So this is actually not the correct tooltip. Let me go ahead and bring it over here. This is the correct tooltip. And the tooltip here does a terrible job of explaining like what is happening. So we're balanced, right? So the way that this works for Balanced Druid specifically, and it's going to work the same for the other specs as well, but basically it's going to give you a bonus based on the form that you're in. So as a Balanced Druid, normally we're in Moonkin form. So down here, if you're in Moonkin form and you press this, we're going to call down waves of empowered falling stars and do a whole bunch of AoE damage. Now, if for whatever reason, you know, you're taking a whole bunch of damage and you want to shift into bear form to kind of soak some of that damage, you can do that. And I can't remember, I think the bear form gives you, it gives you a max health bonus. And then let's, for example, say you want to off heal, you could shift into a non-shapeshift form and press wild growth here and heal your allies. So it's going to be dependent on the form that you're in, which is really nice. It's not always like a off-spec form, you know, the way that the old one used to be. And it's also on a 2-minute cooldown. It's no longer on like a 5 or 6 minute cooldown. So this is actually, I used to hate running Heart of the Wild because it's just difficult to use on a really long cooldown. I just didn't like the gameplay loop with it. So this is definitely going to be very useful to it. And I think this is a huge win for the spec. Yeah, here it is here. So extra health while in bear form. So yeah, that's the new Heart of the Wild. Let's go into some of the class tree changes here. So we have Gift of the Wild. This is going to make Mark of the Wild 100% more effective on us. So instead of giving us 3% verse, we'll get 6% verse. That's going to give us quite a bit more survivability. We are losing renewal. We're also losing nature's vigil. So we do lose a little bit of self-healing with that renewal being gone. And then innervate has actually been moved to a capstone talent. So that means it's going to be at the bottom of our tree here. You can kind of see it. This is the midnight calculator. So yeah, so interesting choice there. Matted Fur now has 2 ranks, so it actually has a stronger shield that it provides. And then Forest Walk is going to give us a little bit more healing received and movement bonus, as it now is 2 ranks as well. Okay, so we had the Midnight Tree open. Let's go back to it and let's talk a little bit about our Apex talents. So Apex talents are going to be over here on the left-hand side. You can put 4 points into them. So first one is we are the wrong spec. Okay, here we go. Now we are the correct spec. So Ascendant Eclipses. So activating an Eclipse makes your next Wrath or Starfire instant, and then the first 3 star surges or star falls you cast during each eclipse deal 20% increased damage. So this is what's really going to help us with that ramp time, right? So once we go into an eclipse, you're going to instant cast Wraths and instant cast Starfires. This is huge because Starfire actually has a decently long cast time associated, and this also helps us build that astral power very quickly. So it's a very it's a lot. The spec is a lot more fluent. You're able to ramp quicker. You're able to build that astral power and get those first shooting stars out. Excuse me, those first star falls out as quickly as you possibly can. So instant cast, more damage. We also have the next rank. So 2 points here. Your critical strikes dealt during an eclipse cause their victims to languish for an additional 20% of damage dealt for 6 seconds. So that will go up to 40% with 2 points. And then we also have Solar Bolt and Lunar Bolt. So activating an Eclipse also launches Solar or Lunar Bolt to enemies within 40 yards at always critical strike. All right, so these will critical strike and funnel into the Ascendance Eclipse above here for that additional dot damage. And the Solar Bolt is going to be for single target damage. It's going to give you a burst of single target damage, and Lunar Bolt is going to be for AoE damage, essentially. So it will hit multiple targets. So yeah, these changes are going to give our Eclipses some burst, which is very nice. So we do have some new talents as well in our spec tree. So we have the improved Eclipse that we talked about. So 1 charge to Solar, 1 to Lunar Eclipse. We also have Meteor Storm. So Starfall deals its damage twice as fast as it did before. So very interesting here. This is going to share a node with Ethereal Kindling, which is just going to extend the duration of our Moonfire and Sunfires. We also have Sculpt the Stars. So the cooldown of Lunar Eclipse and Solar Eclipse reduced by 2 seconds. We also have Total Eclipse. So a 10 to 20% chance, because you can put 2 points into this, to gain both eclipses when entering one. We also have Elun's Challenge. When you exit an eclipse with less than 40 astral power, Wrath and Starfire's cast times are reduced by 25% for 15 seconds or until you enter a new eclipse. So this will be interesting. Basically, you're going to want to exit your eclipse. You're going to want to dump all your astral power. Make sure it is completely gone before you exit an eclipse, because you want this bonus. Because if you get this bonus, this is going to make it feel less bad, essentially, to be outside of an eclipse. Now, you're going to be in an eclipse most of the time. Earlier we said 60 to 80% of the time, and the rest of the time you'll be within Elun's Challenge if you're playing correctly. So being outside of Eclipse is not going to feel as bad if you are able to proc this. This is going to allow us to really generate astral power very quickly with those fast cast time. Okay, we also have Meteorites here. So every time Starfall does damage, a meteorite falls on a target in its range, dealing 50% spell power's astral damage. So this is going to give us even more burst damage. Every single star that hits a target is essentially going to explode. So this is going to give a balanced Druid, in my opinion, extremely good scaling. As you pull more and more packs, Starfall is just hitting more and more mobs at once, not only with the Starfall damage, but also with all these meteorites hitting each mob. So an extremely good bonus here. Very happy to have that. We also have Celestial Fire. So Moonfire, Sunfire, and Shooting Stars damage increased by 50%. In terms of our removed talents, we're losing Astral Smolder, Astronomical Impact, Stellar Flare, Umbral Inspiration, Waning Twilight, and Warrior of Elune. So modified talents, we talked about Eclipse already. We have Umbral Intensity. The cleave effect from this was removed for Starfire, and it's just a flat damage increase now. We have Soul of the Forest. Okay, so this was changed. So Soul of the Forest now is going to give us a huge bonus to the Astral Power regeneration that Wrath or Starfire generates depending on the Eclipse that you're in. Starlord is going to give us a haste stacking buff, essentially. This can stack up to 3 times, 2% haste, each stack for 6% total haste. When you do enter a new eclipse, that does kind of restart the stacks. But for the most part, this will happen pretty passively. We have Touch of the Cosmos, and I don't think it's indicated in the tooltip, but its effect can now trigger from any Wrath or Starfire cast, not just the Wraths within the eclipse. So Long story short, this can now proc outside of an eclipse. We also have orbital strike here, and this is pretty much just getting buffed. The stellar flare effect from this is getting buffed, even though that stellar flare was actually removed. And yeah, let's go ahead and talk about the hero talents now. We'll go ahead and start out with Keeper of the Grove. And we'll just take a look at it in the tree here. So we have Sylvan Beckoning. So entering an eclipse summons a Dryad to assist you for 8 seconds, casting Star Surges and Starfalls. So the entirety of these hero talents are all going to focus around this Dryad that we actually spawn. So directly below that, we have Dryad's Dance. Dryad causes most of your astral power generation to be increased by 10%. And then below that, we have Spirit of the Thicket. Your Starfall damage is increased by 8%, and Star Surge damage is increased by 8%. And then take a look at Elune's Chosen. We have Star Cascade. So gaining astral power with Wrath or Starfire has a 40% chance to launch a Star Surge at a victim at 70% effectiveness. Below that, we have Numeral Swell. So Lunar Eclipse increases arcane damage by an additional 3%. If you are Guardian Druid, then the Lunar Beam increases arcane damage you deal by 10% while it's active. So honestly, kind of a boring talent. And then a Baskin Moonlight, Star Surge damage increased by 10% and Starfall damage increased by 10%. And there are also some changes to a talent here called, a hero talent here called Lunar Calling. So this no longer affects Eclipse states. And this simply just increases the damage dealt to its primary target by 100%, down from 160%. And this has the same functionality that it did in the War Within. So Wrath no longer changes your Eclipse abilities mode to Solar Eclipse. All right, so you'll be permanently in a Lunar Eclipse essentially. Let's also take a quick look at the Balanced Druid tier set. So starting out with the 2-piece, so Shooting Stars does 50% more damage and generates 3 additional astral power outside an eclipse. And then the 4-piece is Starfall and Star Surge damage increased by 5%, and casting them has a 40% chance to strike an effective target with an additional exploding shooting star that deals astral damage to all nearby enemies. So flat damage buff to Starfall, flat damage buff to Star Surge, and they basically have a 40% chance to shoot at this like exploding star. And then the 2 set, of course, we're getting that big bonus to Shooting Stars. If you're not sure what Shooting Stars is, it's going to be at the top of our balance tree here. Moonfire and Sunfire damage over time has a chance to call down a falling star, dealing a whole bunch of damage. So that essentially is getting buffed by 50%. All right, guys, as we did this video, if you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. See you guys in the next one.